Good morning and welcome to Let the Bible Speak. Today we are at the beginning of March of 2026, which means that Let the Bible Speak is actually celebrating 50 years of being on the air, which is crazy to say to me. Back in March of 1976, this was a ministry started by Les Grant, Dave Grant's father actually, who's I know many of you know and remember. And actually, Dave is going to be back next week. He's going to be back on with me. We're going to do a little bit of an interview talking about the history of the program. We got a lot of fascinating episodes kind of lined up for this month in order to help us celebrate the fact that we are now at the 50-year mark. So that's going to kick off next week with an interview with Dave Grant. I'm really looking forward to it and hope you're able to tune in for that. But today, we are going to be talking about this idea of God working in mysterious ways, a phrase that I'm sure many of you have heard at some point in your life. Now, let me tell you about Stella. Stella, every chance she could get, she played the Michigan Lottery Powerball. Every single chance she could get, 3 times a week. She always did the same, and she did this for 39 years, by the way. And for 39 years, every single time she played the exact same numbers. They were sentimental numbers. They were numbers that meant something special to her. And so she always played 5, 11, 13, 33, 37, Powerball 16. She did this every single time she could for 39 years. Now, eventually, she's a Christian, and at one point she decided, she said, I'm not so sure this is the best way of being a good steward of what God is blessing me with, So that was the conclusion she came to, whatever we may think about that, And she said, I need to stop. I got to stop spending money on this. And so she stopped. Just cold turkey, she totally stopped. But she couldn't help the next time that numbers were picked. She's like, okay, I got to see. Like, if I would have gotten a ticket, what would have happened? I got to see. And you wouldn't believe it. Guess which numbers came up the next time when she did not play for the first time in 39 years? 5, 11, 13, 33, 37, 16. She couldn't believe it. By the way, the odds of that are 1 in, let me make sure I got my counting right, 1 in 292,201,338, in case you're curious. Now, people who do not believe in God, they will look at these coincidences in life, and they'll chalk it up to luck, or maybe bad luck in this case, right? Or you'll have some people say, well, that's just the way that life goes. Life has a way of doing that to you. Or maybe they'll talk about the universe in some mystic way, like the universe is sending you a message, right? But Christians know better. Christians, we attribute these apparent coincidences, and we'll say, well, no, there's a higher power behind all of this. In fact, when Stella went to the preacher at her church and told him about all of this unfolding, wouldn't you know it, guess what he said? God, he works in mysterious ways sometimes, doesn't he? Now, admittedly, that phrase is actually it's not a quote from the Bible. There's no verse you can turn to that says God works in mysterious ways. It doesn't exist. However, I am convinced it is a totally biblical concept. Over in Isaiah chapter 55, verse 8, we have an example of this idea. God tells Isaiah, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." Yeah, God does work in mysterious ways. He does things that we don't understand sometimes, right? We're going to shift gears for a second. We'll come back to that thought. I want to talk to you for a minute about Elisha. Elisha. This is not to be confused with Elijah. This is Elisha. He is the protege and the successor to Elijah, the prophet. This is Elisha, the son of Shaphat. Now, we hear all sorts of stories about him, and we see these events unfold between 1 Kings chapter 19 and 2 Kings chapter 8. kind of that large section there off and on deals with Elisha. Now, let me just review. We're not going to have time to read this extensively, but I just want to review with you some of the things that happened in Elisha's life. So, Elisha, we already mentioned, took over for Elijah, and there are some pretty remarkable things that happened there. Elijah ascends to the heavens, and Elisha bears witness to this. Elisha, at one point, Jericho had drinking water that was making people sick, and Elisha miraculously purifies it by the power of God, but Elisha was the one through whom God did that. Elisha, at one point, there's this widow who is poor and destitute, and her sons are about to be sold into slavery, and Elisha provides her with oil, again, miraculously, in this remarkable way. There is the Shunammite woman who was barren. She could have no children, and again, by the power of God through Elisha, Elisha predicts that by this time next year she's going to have a son, and she does. She gives birth to a son. That same son, by the way, a few years later, he dies. There's some kind of brain aneurysm or something that happens, and he dies, and then Elisha goes and raises a boy from the dead, again, by the power of God, but yeah, God is working through Elisha to do some incredible things. At one point, the sons of the prophets, this is in 2 Kings 4, the sons of the prophets are eating this stew that had accidentally been poisoned by this guy that accidentally put something poisonous in it. He didn't know it was poisonous, and Elisha, once again, miraculously purifies that stew. At one point, there are 100 men that are fed with 20 small loaves of bread. Kind of reminds you of what Jesus did with the loaves and the fish, right? Well, Elisha did it on a smaller scale first. At one point, Naaman, the commander of the armies in Assyria, Naaman comes down and he has leprosy, this terrible skin disease. And at Elisha's command, he goes into the Jordan River and washes 7 times and is healed of that leprosy. At one point, he makes a metal axe head float that had been lost in a river. At another point, he had foretold the abundance of bread during this siege of Samaria, which didn't make any sense at the time, but then it ended up happening. The power of God, once again, being demonstrated through Elisha. And then at one point, Hazael, another foreign commander, he predicts his rebellion in Syria. So you have all of these remarkable things that Elisha's doing. And you see, obviously, this is a man of God. This is a man through whom God is working powerfully, right? Which I think is what makes this next passage so confusing, to me anyway. 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 20 and 21. This is right after Elisha had gotten very ill. So Elisha died, and they buried him. Now, bands of Moabites used to invade the land in the spring of the year. And as a man was being buried, behold, a marauding band was seen, and a man was thrown into the grave of Elisha. And as soon as the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood on his feet. So Elisha gets sick, right? We see this back in verse 14. Now, when Elisha had fallen sick with the illness of which he was to die. So he gets sick, and then he dies, unremarkably. It doesn't go into any detail telling us about the death process. It just says he died and he was buried. So he's buried in this tomb. And this random guy, we're not given a name. We're not told how important he was. We're not told what a good person he was. Just this random guy, he dies. And while they're in this funeral procession, on the way to bury him, there's this band of raiders that comes and is going to attack them. They would often be buried with things of some value, and so it wasn't all that surprising to have this happen, right? But when they saw them coming, they throw the body in this tomb. Maybe they probably didn't even know it was Elisha's tomb, but they throw the body in there. And the body that touches the bones of Elisha, he's resurrected. He rises from the dead. And that's really incredible, if not really strange and odd. But what came to mind for me was, why was Elisha not the one that was alive at the end of all this? We see all of the remarkable things that God did through Elisha. Clearly, like we said, this is a man of God. Why is he the one that he couldn't survive this illness? What, God couldn't heal him or God couldn't raise him from the dead? Why is it this other guy? Maybe it's a strange question. It's just when I read that passage, that's what I thought. You think about all of the good that Elisha could have done if he were the one to have risen from the dead at this point instead of this other random person we don't know anything about. I can't help, as I'm giving my own protest to this, I can't help but think about Matthew 27:42 in reference to Jesus on the cross, where they cry out, "He saved others, he cannot save himself." Right? The conclusion I think we have to draw from this and from a number of other passages that confound us is that we serve a God that we do not entirely understand. God, sometimes, he does things that confuse us. I don't know if that's been your experience with God. Certainly has been with me on occasion. Something will happen, and I expect things to go one way, and they do not go that way, to say the least. Right? Augustine of Hippo, in his writings, Confessions, he once said this. He said, quote, "God is not what you imagine, or what you think you understand. If you understand, you have failed." Now, I'd like to give a slight rebuttal to that, because what I'll say is that when we talk about the ability to know God, we can actually, in part, to a degree, we can know who God is. I think there's evidence of this at the beginning of the book of Hebrews. In Hebrews chapter 1, starting in verse 2, look at what the Hebrew writer says. "In these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high." So if you want to know who God is, knowing who Jesus is a really good start to that, right? And so at least in part, we can know who God is. But that being said, I understand this sentiment of, yeah, but we can't entirely know, right? Over in Job chapter 42, verse 3, I think we have a good reflection of this. "Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge?" Job is actually quoting something that God said to him. "Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know." Job and his friends over the last several chapters had been trying to figure out exactly who God is and why he did the things that he did. And God comes back at the end and says, "Who is this that darkens counsel without knowledge? You don't know what you're talking about." And Job admits that. He says, "You're right, I didn't. I was talking about things that were too hard for me to understand." Right? Go to John chapter 9. John chapter 9. I'll just read this to you, and then we'll talk about some of the things we see here. "As he passed by, he," this is referring to Jesus, "saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?'" That was a very common assumption back in those days. If there was a man or a woman, for that matter, who suffered from a physical affliction, there was an assumption that they had done something to deserve that. It's called the retribution principle, right? Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeking. I imagine there was a great deal of confusion, right? The disciples made this assumption. We know how God works. Obviously, this man is blind because God is punishing him or punishing his parents. And Jesus says, "No, No, you don't know what you're talking about. And then not only that, but when he heals him, he spits on the ground, makes this mud, rubs it in his eyes, and people for centuries have tried to figure out, why does he do this? I don't have a great answer for you. We could pretend all day that we know exactly who God is, we know exactly how God works, but in reality, at the end of the day, I'm not sure that we entirely do. I imagine there is a great deal of confusion as the disciples looked up at the cross and saw the crucified King. And they struggled to understand. Which goes back to this basic question of how can we serve a God we don't entirely understand? How? Now, one option in response to this question is just to throw up our hands and say, we can't. I give up. You'll have people who just opt for resignation. They apostatize. They leave the faith. They're confused by who God is and what He's doing and what He has done and will do. And you say, well, I guess that's it for me. I'm done. I'm done trying to understand. You have that option. Another option is blind acceptance. You'll have some people that say, well, I don't understand, but you know what? I'm just going to trust God anyway. Those are not the only two options. You'll often have that sort of false dichotomy presented. But believe it or not, those are not your only two options. It's not either, oh, you give up, or you have to just blindly go all in. I really don't think that's the case. I think there is a third option. And that third option is to move forward with an informed faith. And no, I do not think that those last two words are an oxymoron. Informed faith. That's a real thing. Over in Psalm 13, if you have a Bible with you, turn to Psalm 13. Read this with me. Psalm 13 is a great example of this. It's not very long. David says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because He has dealt bountifully with me." So David is distressed. He says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" Right? There were a number of occasions in his life where he was distressed. We don't know exactly what's happening here, but it could be any number of them. And he doesn't understand what God is doing. Or in this case, he doesn't understand what God isn't doing. He says, "Have you forgotten me? Why are you leaving me here? What's happening?" And in response to that confusion, he doesn't give up. He also does not go on this route of blind acceptance. Instead, what does he do? He draws on his past experience. He draws on what he does know about God, namely that God is loving, that He is powerful, that He is faithful, and he uses that knowledge to face the unknown courageously, right? He has dealt bountifully with me, and He's not going to stop. His experience is that God is loving and faithful, and so he absolutely expects that trend is going to continue. Mark is a 72-year-old Christian. He's got a really big family. And at 72 years old, he was diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer that had metastasized into his lungs and into his brain. For that kind of cancer, the survival rate at 5 years is only 3%. And so things did not look very good for him, but he and his family, also many of them Christian, he and his family, they prayed. And they prayed and they prayed and they prayed for his healing, and there were some mixed expectations. They really didn't know what was going to happen. They had sort of accepted, okay, maybe it's not in God's will for him to be healed. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But they continued to pray. And he went on this really aggressive regimen of radiation and chemo, and it was really, really effective, actually. So effective that a year and a half later, there was no evidence of any tumor, spot, anything. There was no evidence of cancer. And so after that year and a half, they said, look, God has healed you. It's amazing. It's incredible. And then 6 months later, 2 years after that initial diagnosis at 74 years old, just all of a sudden it seemed like he had this really severe, rapid onset of symptoms. And it was so fast that 2 weeks later he was pretty much on his deathbed, on his last leg. And they're all super confused because just a few weeks ago they were under the impression that God had healed him, and now here he is about to lose his life. And Mark is in a hospital bed, and his granddaughter is there with him. And his granddaughter's talking to him about this, and he says, she asks him, she says, why would God do this? I don't understand. And Mark has probably the most intelligent response that you could in that situation. He says, I don't know, but he's been so good to me, hasn't he? God does not always expect us to understand. Don't beat yourself up if you don't. That's totally normal. But he does expect us to trust him. He expects us to trust that he is working for our ultimate good, whether we understand how that is or not, right? Not blindly, by the way, but because we know through Scripture and through the character of Christ, we know that God is loving, that he is powerful, and that he is faithful. I want you to imagine thousands of years ago, Moses is relaying the instructions for Passover. Back in the days when the 10 plagues were happening and the Israelites were about to be freed from Egypt, the last plague that God was going to unleash on the Egyptian people was the firstborn being killed by the presence of God going through the land of Egypt. But he told the Israelites, all you have to do is you need to put lamb's blood on your doorpost, and that way when I pass over the house where you are, then I will not enter that house to take the firstborn. Right? So I want you to imagine you're there, and here's guy number one. They listen to the instructions, to Moses relay all these instructions, and it's after dinner, and they're talking about things, and one of them says, I don't really understand this whole lamb's blood thing. I don't really know, why would that make any difference? I don't get it. Why do we have to put blood on our door, and then we're going to have to clean it up in the morning, it's going to be a mess, and I don't know, it seems strange to me. And then the other guy says, I don't know, it makes perfect sense to me. Moses said, you got to put the lamb's blood on your doorpost, and God will pass over your house, and then we'll be freed. Simple as that. And so both of those guys, they go home that evening, and both of them do the exact same thing. They put the lamb's blood on the doorpost. But one of them is really, really skeptical, and the other one is really confident. That night, when the presence of God passes through Egypt, which of them is saved? Both of them. Because they both put the lamb's blood on the doorpost, right? It is not the intensity, but the object of your faith that saves you. It's not how well you grasp the intricacies of metaphysics that saves you. It is the fact that you did the thing that God told you to do. It's Jesus who saves you, right? It's Jesus. When we think about God working in mysterious ways, sometimes we get discouraged because we'll come across a situation in our life that we don't understand. You're not required to understand. You are required to obey. I know that that's going to be a contentious statement for some of you, but it's what we see in Scripture. In Hebrews chapter 10, verses 36 through 39, listen to what the Hebrew writer says, and he's actually quoting here from Habakkuk chapter 2. He says, "You have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. For yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. Simple as that. God absolutely works in mysterious ways sometimes. He does. And sometimes it's a struggle for us to understand. But ultimately, we have to trust that God is working for our good, even if we can't put together all the puzzle pieces right now. There's a song that we sing in our church. It's called Farther Along. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. I love the sentiment of that song. It's an old song. It's an old style hymn, but I think it perfectly reflects where we are at in the journey of faith. Some things we are just not going to understand totally right now. Okay. Now, what I'd like to spend the last couple minutes on right now actually is telling you and reminding you what we talked about at the beginning of the episode. Over the next few weeks, we've got some special episodes coming up. Next week, we're going to be doing an interview with Dave Grant to celebrate the fact that Let the Bible Speak has been on air now for 50 years, 50 years, since March of 1976. We'll be talking about some of the history there. We'll be talking about the nature of the program. And then the next 2 weeks after that, we're actually going to spend time talking about the mission of the program. It's going to be me, Dave Grant, and also, if you remember, Jim Larson, previously the minister at the Marquette Church of Christ, and then Brian Poe is going to be on there as well. It's going to be the four of us talking about the core mission of the program, what we're trying to do, and what we have to look forward to moving forward as the program continues on to its 51st year, hopefully, if God wills it. So I'm really excited about all that. We're going to top it off with a worship service being aired and broadcast on March 29th as a 1-hour special on both Fox UP and TV6. So I'm really excited about all that, and I hope you are as well, and I hope you're able to join us for some of those episodes as we get down to why this ministry exists and the fact that God has seen it fit to extend it as long as He has by His grace and by His mercy. Thank you so much for joining me today. May God bless you. Have a great week.